So as you can see, we're in the book of Colossians. We're getting really near the end of this study. If my math is right, I think it's probably just this Sunday and next Sunday. So we will be working our way into chapter 4. A lot of the ending of chapter 4 is just sort of personal interaction between Paul and the different characters involved. So we'll hit that lightly a bit next week. But today we want to work our way into at least the first 6 verses of chapter 4. I want to thank this class for your good attention. This has been a very slow-moving class, 12 weeks on just 4 chapters, but it's so rich. I mean, we spent a month on chapter 3 and just trying to live out these principles. And in fact, we still have one more to talk about at the end of chapter 3. So I hope you've enjoyed that study. Quick note for what's coming. We have 2 more weeks of this, and then on Wednesday evenings we'll be moving from Jonah into the cycle of the Judges. But it is likely on Sunday morning that we will be focused in upon the Beatitudes, where we pick a Beatitude each week and we elaborate from the Sermon on the Mount, and then we expand it out through the New Testament into the letters. So I think there'll be a lot for us to explore. So if you've got some good old Beatitude stuff, you might want to start pulling it out and working on it. Beatitudes, the attitudes we got to be. So that's where we're headed most likely in a couple weeks. In our text, please, in Colossians chapter 3, I've just highlighted in yellow the thing at the bottom because that's what still remains for our discussion. And so we're going to jump right in on that. We've been looking at the fact that all throughout this 3rd chapter, there are all these great principles. Morality in verse 5, and trying to look more like Jesus in verse 10, and forgiveness and love verses 13 and 14, and all these things. But what you'll notice is, starting around verse 18, is it gets really practical. It says, let's take those qualities and apply them to fellow Christians first of all, but also take them home with us in the way that we live in our home. And we will get a chance, you and me, we will get a chance in a minute when we come back for the 3rd session to look at husbands and wives and men and women from 1 Timothy 2. But I want to talk a little bit about masters and slaves. Here's the thing about masters and slaves. There are several passages in the New Testament that challenge slaves to behave in a certain way and also challenge masters. Can you think of some of those passages? Where would we go in the New Testament besides Colossians 3 and 4 to say, here's the way a slave should behave and here's the way a master should behave? You think of other passages? Yeah, definitely. Like Colossians and Ephesians are nearly the same letter, really. They give you this nice dynamic multiple view. But this is also found in Ephesians chapter 6 and this same idea. So I did a little bit of research. I don't want to take all morning on it, but a little bit of research because I feel like we talk about this a lot and we apply it to where Bubba works, and his boss, or Cedric and then the village and Trey's role and all these different authority constructs. And if you're in an authority situation at work, you can really derive from the master-slave instruction and you can apply it to whatever authority figure you are or you are under. That's probably a good idea, but it misses something. It misses that this was an extreme and difficult situation. Anybody aware, and let's see if you can come up with some guesses, anybody aware of how you became a slave? If you were a 1st century Gentile living in Colossae or Ephesus or Philippi or Rome, how did you get to be in such a luxurious position? Yeah, there are at least 7 options, and one of them is piracy and kidnapping. They come and they take you because you don't have the power to defend yourself, and they put you into one of the other things, which is a slave trade. You were free, and now you're no longer free. How else do you think people became slaves and had to live under that? Okay, yeah. You would have to show up and sell yourself into slavery. Because you couldn't pay your debts. You didn't just claim, some bankruptcy thing or some bank come in and bail you out. If life didn't go financially the way you wanted it to, and there are people in this room who know what that's like, your only recourse was to sell yourself into oppression and slavery. All right? Anything else? Yeah, you were born into slavery. Your mom and dad were slaves. They either were captured or they were born into it, or they had some debt and they were unable to pay it, and so that's your life from birth. You are under that construct. Let's see, we got warfare, the result of war. We have debt. We have kidnapping. We have a slave trade that you may be born into. One other one was good old-fashioned criminal punishment. If you did the wrong things, then your penalty is you are now a slave for the rest of your life. The point is, there's nothing really kind of remotely connected to working at the Target distribution center. Do you see the point I'm saying? Like it's barely even a remote connection. It is more extreme in probably any conceivable way. Now, I think we can still use it, but if it is so extreme and trapping and hopeless and desperate and inescapable, how are we going to use the instruction when we don't know slavery in our own lives? How's that gonna work with my professor at school? What do you think? Should we just skip this part? It's too bad, too dark, yeah? Okay. Okay. So what she's saying is, if you zoom out and you take away really desperate situations and all of the just slavery things, it is what you think that it is. If you back up far enough, what you see is this is an authority construct that you are under, in this case, maybe against your will, or maybe as a result of your bad choices. In the case of work, some of you are like the place I work, it's a result of my bad choices. Look, things happen, but that's where you are. So when you back up, there is an authority thing. That's helpful. So we're still talking about authority in general, which is beneficial. How else could extreme situations like this and God's instruction, I'll telescope this a little bit for you. God's instruction under extreme peril, how can that be helpful to Karen working for the principal or superintendent? How does that connect? Yes. Okay.
For righteousness. Whenever they would be taken over, he would tell them, and they would submit to him, they would obey them, they listened to the word of the prophet, they would find favor in the eyes of their captors.
Okay.
That's that place of peril.
Okay. So interesting, and I think you're getting where I'm hoping that we can go before we read the end of this chapter, and that is even under desperate slave situations, national slave situations, there was a place in that to carry out God's will and intent. And in some cases, the way that those under oppression behaved had a spiritual impact on even their oppressors. And God was always at work, even under the most extreme of cases. All right? Yeah? Anybody else? Yes?
By using the slave master example, it basically covers any situation we can.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's going to apply to any kind of authority.
That's it. And that's the way to pull together all the answers. And that's what I'm looking for here. Let's read it. We're going to read verses 22 through 25. And when you see that first word, slaves, I want you thinking a worse situation than I've ever been in. A more oppressive boss than I've ever met. A more desperate situation than even those things that I frequently complain about. This is worse. This isn't one of those, well, Chris, this is pretty good instruction, but Paul doesn't know what my situation is. He knows way worse situations. He's talking about way worse situations. And what would apply to them under that absolutely applies to you under whatever this might be. That's the kind of the comparison. Let's read it, and then you tell me what's there. Chapter 3, verses 22 through 25. Slaves, in all things obey those who are your masters on earth, not with external service, as those who merely please men, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do, do your work heartily, as for the Lord, rather than for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. For he who does wrong will receive the consequences of the wrong which he has done, and that without partiality. And that's a principle that would apply to me if I was disrespectful of authority, and it will eventually apply to authority figures if they're disrespectful of your human rights. But starting back in verse 22, he is talking to a slave who is almost certainly under really desperate, awful circumstances. And what is his first message to that slave? Verse 22. Obey them. Obey them how? Give me some more detail in verse 22. Obey them, Alyssa. Okay. The guy, whether they're looking or not, because the eyes of God are always looking. It says not, this is the Bible idiom, the not but construction, where the first thing's not eliminated, but the second thing is focused on. Let me explain. Not with external service. Is Paul saying you don't have to do anything that they can see or say? No, he's saying obey the external service. In other words, they tell you to go, you go. They tell you to do this, you do that. Unless they're asking you to violate the will of God, you do it. But his point is not just with external service, but how? All right, go ahead and raise your hand if that's easy. Can I get an easy button for that? Slaves to masters. God is saying, don't just do what they say, but also, verse 22, do it with, that was, I think, one of the things we put up today, that the gospel produces. It turns out the gospel produces something that is possible in every situation. That's kind of cool. It's not just come to church and have sincerity of faith. Oh, God is so good. It's no matter where you are, there is that. But his point is, I want you to obey them out of a sincerity of heart. How would I ever get motivated to genuinely have an affection to do what a master is telling me to do when I do not respect them? How would I ever get motivation for that? And Alyssa touched on it, so I'm going to hold off on her a minute because she got it already. But come back and fill it back in. How would I ever feel that way towards someone who I have no real respect for or who is unkind to me? What does it say? A to the men. Because I fear God, and God has commanded me to have respect for that role. God has remember I did a lesson the other day on respecting or honoring the roles? We pick a lot of people apart in those roles, all different types, to justify wrongful behavior under those roles. God said, I don't know what you're thinking. Fearing me means honoring those roles from a sincere heart because you love me. And of course, we can have a good effect on that person. Yes?
Of course, slaves should love their masters as well.
Yeah, love their masters, love their souls, care about them. Whatever you do, do your work heartily as for the Lord. Your master is not the Lord, but obey him as if it were the Lord. This is really helpful to wives, I think, in certain situations. How am I supposed to follow this guy? Follow this guy as if he was the Lord. He's nothing like the Lord. No, but the Lord is here. And the Lord is with you in this place. And that's important. Yes, Kyle?
I think the other thing that we can get from this is that we can serve God in any situation that we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
And it's our choice.
Okay. We can serve God in any situation we find ourselves in. It is our choice. Notice that the Lord permeates this text. Verse 22, fearing the Lord. Verse 23, as for the Lord. Verse 24, from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, and it is the Lord Christ whom you serve. And of course, if you decide to do wrong, you're going to face consequences along everybody else. That'd be really great. You know, I'm under an oppressive master who is ungodly, and so I choose to be ungodly. So now guess who gets punished? We both do. It's not a great strategy. It's not a great strategy to go, because of his sin, I'm not going to behave like I should. Now we just have two people who are in trouble, instead of one person's conduct having the potential to shape someone else's. Yes?
I think this scripture, for this section, it can be difficult because, our country wants us to have very checkered past. And I've heard non-believers issue things like, well, the Bible was used to subdue slaves and to force them and brainwash them into some sort of subservience. And that's not what this is about at all. This is about how to promote the Word of God, how to be a good example as a Christian, and how the spiritual things of God, the righteousness of God, it does not affect others in a way that makes sense, right? From our fleshly minds, it has a superior effect.
Yeah. Boy, that's really well said, and it's going to foster into what we're about to talk about in a minute when we come back again. The idea of Christianity and furthering the administration of God, which is by faith, 1 Timothy, That idea is you are behaving in such a countercultural way that the culture does not understand your behavior. Your behavior shouldn't even really be comprehensible by our worldly culture. Well, what are we talking about? Well, in this case, we're talking about slaves, born into it, forced into it, kidnapped into it, and they are living with faith, and they're living with love for their masters, and they're obeying their masters out of love for God, and they're shining even in what most would say is a desperate and dark place. If we're not willing to be different than what most slaves would do, which is waiting on the door to be unlocked so you can take off running, then we don't understand what it means to further the administration of God. Our behavior has to look different than the world. This is a super extreme case, but again, the point we're making is if it's true under these auspices, then it's true in your home, it's true at your workplace, it's true under a government, etc. Yeah.
I'm reminded of Acts 16, where you got, it wasn't necessarily a bond-slave situation, but a slave-master situation, but they were under bondage. And you got Paul and Silas there, and the jail cells are open, and how did they react?
Yeah.
Did they run?
No.
As a slave probably would have. That's
Yeah.
an opportunity. They stayed, they continued to worship, and it was because of that their influence on the jailer was just magnified.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think that's the point for us is, does our behavior magnify our faith to those that we are under?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
do we influence them in that way? Do they question, why are you acting in this way?
Yeah.
Why are you doing this?
Yeah, why are you doing this? Perfect example, Acts 16. You can't get any better than that. Acts 16, Paul and Silas are unlawfully jailed. An earthquake comes and they're set free. The jailer's about to kill himself because he knows what prisoners do when the gates fall open. And so he's about, and Paul's like, don't, And then he ends up preaching the gospel to them, and the whole family's baptized in the middle of the night because that prisoner behaved counterculture. And that's sort of how you can see whatever you're under right now that's a very difficult authority construct. Governmentally, politically, socially, economically, these are opportunities. By the way, I should have did both of these because we're doing slaves and masters, but you get the point. I need just one or two more comments. We've got to move on. Mr. Kelly, got a short one?
Yeah. The word slave, doulos, or something like that in the Greek, like 27 times in the New Testament. Paul said his bond servant, slave, he said, woe unto me if I don't preach the gospel. The Bible says that all judgment is to God. And, the Lord showed me years ago, and I can't get the passages to back it up, but He showed me years ago to obey my earthly masters and trust Him to rule over me through them. And the tension just went.
Yeah, a lot of trust.
All else explained.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Hey, let me move forward a little bit. I know we have some more comments, but I want to make sure we cover both sides of this. Just very briefly look into the beginning of chapter 4. And I'm also going to read a couple of verses from Ephesians 6. As we mentioned earlier, they work in tandem with each other. They kind of fill in each other's gaps. But what you have at the end of chapter 3 is you have slaves connecting everything about where they are. How does it show fear for the Lord? How does it serve the Lord? In fact, it is the Lord whom you serve. And then chapter 4, verse 1, masters, grant to your slaves justice and fairness, knowing that you too have a master in heaven. That's a difficult passage if you wanted to be contentious and fill up the whole next 15 minutes about how were their masters who were Christians. Well, there were. Onesiphorus and his relationship with Philemon, which is in the same town, by the way, which is interesting. I think he's actually talking to Philemon here, who had servants like Onesimus. But there were masters who were Christians who had slaves. Maybe they had them for different reasons, maybe less negative reasons. Maybe there were slaves who indentured themselves on purpose. But the point of masters is so simple. Treat your slaves. And again, if it applies here, it applies to everything. Husbands and wives, husbands and kids, bosses and employees, all of it. Treat your slaves with justice and fairness. Why? Why? You got the power. At least you think you do. Why?
It says in Romans 13 that people who are in a position of authority, all authority, is because of God. So you have been placed in a position to steward them,
Okay.
to manage them, if you will. I think of like 1 Timothy, your letter this morning went through, it says the type of people who the law stands for, people who are in opposition to it.
Yeah.
Slave traders is one of them.
Yeah.
These aren't slave traders.
Yeah, it may not be.
It was only
Yeah.
to just serve for a time being or for a purpose.
Yeah.
But you were
Yeah.
to treat them as your own family, as your neighbor.
Yeah.
To love them. And some of them wouldn't even leave after that. They would take them to the
Yeah.
doors and they would come through.
That's a good point. The master slave is not as nasty as those words sometimes connote. It could have been under economic distress where the masters end up being a gift to these slaves in the way that they treat them and teach them the truth. Yes?
We have a master in heaven who gives us mercy, who shows mercy to us all the time.
Yeah.
Throughout, that we do not extend mercy.
Amen. That's right. You guys know that, right? You know that? You have a master in heaven. He is your master. And to the extent that we express forgiveness and mercy and help to people, so it shall be extended to us. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Another way of putting that is do unto others because that's how God's going to do unto you. It reminds me of the prayer, Matthew 6, the Lord's Prayer, where Jesus, the most difficult part of the Lord's Prayer is when I would pray to him, forgive me. What's the rest of it? We need to change that. That's too much. Isn't it too much? Jesus asks a lot of you. Forgive me as I have forgiven others. Raise your hand if you want that. Come on. James wants it. You want that? I like that you raise your hand. That's really great. I'm like this. I mean, do I want that? I'll tell you this, I don't want to get off track. I'm growing in that. I feel like Jesus said that before I was born. It's been around my whole life. And I feel like coming to real grips, like actually coming to grips with the way I treat you and extend mercy to you and hope for you and correct you if needed and you correct me and all that. The way I do that is exactly what I'm asking him to do to me. And man, when you can get your mind to connect those things, self-preservation kicks in. I don't want to get crushed by the Lord. That's what I deserve. I don't want that. And it will change this. You cannot disassociate this relationship from this. They move together. They slide. This gets better. This gets closer. That kind of thing. All right. There was maybe one or two more comments. Masters, slaves. Okay. Go back to our text a little bit. These last 10 minutes or so. Again, the whole point we're making. I was going to read Ephesians 6 since I've made mention of it. Just a little bit of an addition. Ephesians 6. Ephesians 6, there is more, again, about slaves. Be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling in the sincerity of your heart as to Christ. Ephesians 6:6, not by way of eye service. This is basically the same as the Colossian account. Not men pleasers. Don't do just enough to keep them off your back, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. With good will render service, as to the Lord, not to men, even though it is to men. Knowing that whatever good thing each one does, even under the worst possible authority construct, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether slave or free. And masters do the same thing to them. What does he mean by same thing? He means as to the Lord, as you would if it was the Lord. And give up threatening masters, knowing that both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no partiality with him. That's a powerful little at the end. Under authority construct, I don't know if we call it partiality, but I'm the boss and you're not. Let's not call it partiality, but I have the power and you don't. Well, here's the thing. In the end, there will be no partiality with God. Boss, employee, husband, wife, master, slave, he will look at them all equally, on equal level, and he will determine how many of them have behaved like Jesus. And he will render judgment. And we're all going to be on our knees together. Really great point for men in authority to think about. It's going to go, I know it looks like this right now. In the end, it's going to go like this. We're all going to go like this. And he's going to look at us all exactly the same way. And so it humbles us, and humility is always a good thing. Yeah, some who seem the least, valued the least, will be the greatest. All right, I want to move into a little bit about prayer in verses 2 through 6, which should be a good way to end our section here and going into kind of a review next week. But any final thoughts or questions about master-slave design? Okay.
Is the context, just in my mind, is the context for the end of this epistle as well as the one for Ephesians? He's talking about, this will be addressed to believers. A master is a believer, a slave is a believer.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe so. Doesn't mean all these slaves were under believing masters.
They could come to fellowship because
Yeah, well, these slaves may be Christians and their masters are not Christians. But in some cases, it's clear that it was both. Which again, and we're going to run out of time in our quarter. I thought we'd have more time in the quarter, but I wanted to tack on Philemon because it is this. Do you guys remember that? They're in Colossae. This church probably meets at Philemon's house, and Philemon has slaves. So it's just legitimate because Onesimus was one of his slaves that had fled. And ends up in prison in Rome. And Paul converts him to Christ and says, hey, you need to go back and make it up. You need to go back and make things up with Philemon, but I'll go ahead and send you with a letter to soften the blow a little bit. And it's just, that's what the letter is, right? All right, a couple thoughts here as we get down to the end. Last slide for me. We've got to devote ourselves to prayer. Prayer is needed. Let me go back. Look at this stuff over here. See this? Not easy. Not a lot of easy stuff in the bottom left-hand corner. We're going to need to be extremely prayerful. Prayerful for ourselves and for others. Let's read this. Colossians 4, 1 through 4, and then I'll just work through a series of questions with you. Masters, grant to your slaves justice and fairness, knowing that you too have a master in heaven. Devote yourselves to prayer. And by the way, hard to tell what's happening here. I think he's broadening back out to everyone. You have a little boldness by the number 2, which indicates like a paragraph change. That's all added later. But I'm convinced that this is not just for masters, in other words. Backing up. Devote yourselves to prayer, keeping alert in it with an attitude of thanksgiving, praying at the same time for us as well, that God will open up to us a door for the word, so that we may speak forth the mystery of Christ, for which I have also been imprisoned, that I may make it clear in the way I ought to speak. It's a great little passage here about prayer, because it starts with your life and the roles you're in and how attentive you are to addressing God about those things. And then it says, don't stop there. I don't want your prayer life to just be, hey Jaden, good to see you, bud. I don't want your prayer life to just be, I'm Jaden going, look, here's what's happening in my life and what's happening to me and how I need to be handling it. And it's all in this me bubble. Okay, me bubbles are fine as long as you're ready to go before your prayer is finished. It's not just me and this and that. He said, I want you praying for yourself, praying for your roles, but what does he ask them to do in prayer that is very healthy for them? In the verses that we just read. What do you ask him to do? Be thankful, okay? So when you're praying about your situation, it's like in Philippians 4. No matter what you're going through, no matter what the anxieties are, be thankful. But before you're done, you need to pop the bubble. How? Tell me more about what he said to pray for. You need to pray for others. Particularly, who does he say to pray for here? Us, meaning apostles, the church, the minister, Timothy and Titus and Apollos and Timothy. And Paul, pray what for them? Oh, it turns out that's the thing. You guys know what the thing is? It's kind of like there's a thing in marriage called quality time. That's the thing. There's a thing in everything else. And the thing about everything else is sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm going to pause for 2 minutes for dramatic effect. That's the thing. The thing isn't how much money we make. The thing isn't how much we get. The thing is wherever you put me, wherever I am, however I got there, there is this mystery, Ephesians 3, that have been hidden throughout all the ages. The mystery is that even Gentiles can be saved through Jesus Christ, Ephesians 3:6. This mystery. The world, the angels were begging God for centuries, tell us what the mystery is. He'd say, you just hang on. The Jews were wondering what the mystery was. Wait. In the dispensation, remember from just a few minutes ago? In the Christian dispensation, all went away, and the power of Jesus could save anyone, anywhere, anytime, from any background. All of us have access to Jesus. He said, when you're praying, I know it's going to be about you, and he's not mad at you. I know it's about your life and your stuff and what you're doing, but what I just got through telling you in chapter 3, verse 22, is that even if you're a slave, you're projecting Jesus in that role. And I tell you what will help you remember that. Pray for teachers. Pray for preachers. Pray for missionaries. Pray for shepherds. Pray for Paul if you lived in this time. Pray that these men, in their roles, Paul would be like, my role is pretty tough too, and then he'd show you all the lashes on his back, right? He'd go, my role is pretty tough too. But what I want you to pray is God keeps putting me in places like that prison with Paul and Silas. He keeps putting me in places to share the gospel. I'm going to tell you that, going back to the slide earlier today, and you're going to see it again when we come back, if that glorious gospel of Jesus Christ in you and through you is not the reason you're awake today, to honor Him and to share Him and to help people know Him, then your life lacks purpose. And a great way to capture it is to be prayerful for others. I pray Thomas here gets a chance to share Jesus this week. I pray Jennifer back there at work finds somebody who's looking for a church home. I pray that Terry runs across someone who's going through a tough time, and what they need to hear is that there is peace and something greater than their business. Praying that for you, because that's what I want for me too. We've got to get our attention on that. So there's a lot of that in this text. Some qualities of prayer teaches here. This is 3 questions as we close this. How can any of chapter 3 happen consistently without prayer? It's just not going to, because it's going to be purposeless. You know, if the idea is I'm going to go out and live with thanksgiving and joy and faith, but it's not going to be about the gospel and it's not going to be about spreading Christ, then it'll falter. What did Paul ask them to pray on his behalf? He asked them to pray, you saw it already, that a door will open for the word so that we may speak forth the mystery of Christ. This, somebody said it a minute ago, so I'll ask you. How, let's say I'm a slave, or I'm in just the worst, let's bring it back to modern. You're going through the worst month of your life. It's never been this bad. And you pray, you're supposed to pray. And you pray with thanksgiving. How is that possible? I can't be thankful, Chris. My life is awful. Everything is bad. I'm in the worst place I've ever been. How can I pray with thanksgiving? Peace of Christ in your heart? You were right, by the way. I'm just picking on you. I'm a child of God. Hey, thank you. I'm taking that personal. Thank you. Yes. Okay. Gospel. You guys are coming back to the gospel and it's warming my heart. But I want you to also come up with a word that starts with O and ends with opportunity. You get that one though? Were you able to do that one? Opportunity. I was at the hospital on Sunday when Miss Phyllis was up there. I saw her on Saturday. It was Saturday. I first saw you up there. Her husband was gone. And she had her hands like this, and she was praising the Lord, and she was calling on the angels. And a doctor would come in, and she'd be like, praise God that He's positioned you here in Jesus' name with the power to help. Like, I'm going, she's preaching. She's losing a 60-year mate. She's preaching. You think I'm ever going to forget that? I'm never going to forget that. Never. Opportunity. If that's what we're about. What was that deal about the first hour today? That's what we're about. And it's going to come through in everything. Hey, we'll come back next week. Actually, Lord willing, I'll be out of town next week, so we'll have another teacher, and we'll just wrap up chapter 4. There's some things here. But thank you guys for your good attention. Look for opportunities this week and be thankful in every